Arbitrary YouTube channel. Today's class will be learning how to make this beautiful flare dress. Okay, it has a net yoke and this beautiful sleeve. It's a very simple tutorial and it's really beautiful as we have seen. This is something you like to learn. Kindly stay tuned to the end of this tutorial. Thank you. To make this, I already drafted my basic bodice as you have seen. This is my armhole line, my bust point, the under bust, and my waistline. So this is a yoke dress. So the first thing I'm going to decide is the depth of my neckline, and that's where my yoke is going to stop. So from this upper part now, I'm going to be measuring around 6 inches or 7 inches depending on how low you want this to be. So I'm going to measure around 6.5. Okay, so you can just make the 6.5 straight like this, or you can just give it a style line depending on what you want. So making it straight, I think it's going to be around 6 inches on our armhole area. So if you're okay with that, you can leave it, and if you don't want it to take that much from your armhole, you can just leave it around 5 inches and then you curve it. So I think I'm just going to mark mine straight like this, excuse me. Okay, and this upper part is going to become my yoke, and this lower part then becomes the lower part of my body. So on this lower part, I'm going to take my bust here. That the bust points I'm working with is the bust span is 9 inches divided by 2 is 4.5. So I'll mark 4.5 inches on from my center fold, and then I'm going to connect it up to where my neckline stops, which is here. Okay, so now on my under bust, I'm going to take a dart of 1 inch on both sides. I'll do the same thing on the waistline as well, and then I'm going to connect it. So after connecting it, I'm going to use my curved ruler to connect this to my bust points on both sides. Okay, and then here on the upper part, I'm going to take a dart of 1/2 inch on both sides to tighten the upper part. So this 1 inch, I'm going to replace it back on this part, and then I'll reconnect my armhole line. Okay, so now I'm going to connect this new dart as well to my bust point on both sides. So after this, the next thing is to take my circumference measurement. My bust is 44 divided by 4 is 11. So I have about 4.5 inches. I'm just going to shift it, and then I have 11 inches here. I'm going to add 1.5 inch seam allowance to that. And then on my waistline, the waist is 9.5, so I have about 3.5 inches here. So I'll mark my 9.5 and add my 1.5 seam allowance as well. So I'm going to connect that, and after connecting it, I'm going to extend my bust point line and then go down by 2 inches to take my bust dart. So from there, I'm going to connect to my bust point again, and this becomes my bust dart. So this is my bust dart, and this is my regular bustier dart. So now I'm going to cut this out. So for the back, I already drafted my back panel as we have seen. I can see, for those that always ask for the bust dart, you can see that my back is shorter by 2 inches, okay, because of this bust dart. So by the time I close up this bust dart, it will turn to the same thing. So you can see what we have there. So it will reconcile the side for me, so I'm not going to be having any shortage or any problem with that. So to create the yoke for the back, you can take it the same point where you took the front, or you can just take it anywhere you want. So I have about 5.5 inches here, so I'm measuring the 5.5 inches here as well, or I can even go up depending on what you want. So I'm stopping mine at around 5 inches. You can make it straight, but I like my back yoke to have like this V shape. Okay, so I'm just going to connect it in a V form like this to my chest line area. So this upper part now becomes the yoke for the back, and I'm going to cut that using a net fabric. So I'll cut this out now. For my back, I'm not going to separate it, so I'll just cut the lower part as a single piece, and then I'll go ahead and cut it on my fabric. So now I'll take my scissors and cut out this pattern that I have. Okay, so I've cut this out now. These are my front pieces. I've closed the bust dart as well, and this is my yoke for the front. Okay, so cutting out my shoulder slope and my neckline as well. So for the back, I've also cut off the yoke and the lower part. So this is the yoke and this is the lower part. So this yoke, I'm going to be cutting it with net, and I'm going to be using my ankara fabric to cut out the lower bodice, and then I'm going to cut lining for this as well, because I'm going to be patting it with a soft wording. So I need lining to cover the wording for me. So I'll go ahead and cut out my ankara fabric as well as my lining, and then I'll bring it back for us to continue. So I'm gonna have to cut it on my main fabric. This is the black. Okay, I notched the dart area and I added allowance for joining the yoke as well. So this is the front side. I have added my wording, soft wording, to the bust area. That's what I'm padding it with, and I also cut lining for it. So now what I'm going to do first is to go ahead and hold my dart for the back, for both lining and main bodies, and then for the front I'm going to join the front together with the bustier that we took. I'll do this for both front and back as well. Then I'm going to bring it back. So this is my yoke. You can see I'm using this net fabric, and I also added allowance on the lower and the upper part. So this is the front and this is the two back yoke. So I'll go and sew it now, and then I'll bring it back for us to continue. So I've joined the darts together. This is the front and this is the back. So now the next thing is for me to sew the yoke. Okay, so I'm going to bring in my yoke. Okay, so this is the back. I'm going to bring in the front yoke, and then I'm going to sew it to the upper part here. Okay, then after sewing my yoke, I'm going to use my lining to turn it out. So I'll do the same thing for the back as well. I'm going to sew the back yoke as well, and then use the lining to turn it out. So after this, we're going to move straight to cutting the flare. Okay, so I've sewn my yoke, as you can see, and then I used my lining to cover it up. You can see how neat it is. This is the front and these are the two back panel. So the next thing now is for me to cut my flare. So I'm working with a 180-degree flare. So I'm going to fold my fabric into two. Then after folding into two, I'm going to fold in form of a triangle like this. So now after folding it, the radius that I'm going to be using is my waist measurement, which is 38 inches. Then I'm going to add 2-inch allowance for my zipper, and then I'm going to add extra 4 inches. This is because I want to separate this flare. I want it to have a pocket, two pockets on the side. So for it to have pockets, it means my front flare has to be separated from my back flare, so that I can have enough allowance, because it means this flare is going to enter into my side seam allowance. That's why I'm adding this extra 4. So whatever it is you have here, you're going to divide it by 3.142. so for me this is going to be around 44 inches. 44 divided by 3.142, whatever you get is going to be the radius of your flare. Okay, so to know the length of your flare, you're going to measure from your shoulder to where this flare is going to stop. Remember, it still has a net underneath. So for me, it's going to stop around 34 inches. So the 34 inches, I'm going to subtract my half length of 17 inches, and I'll be left with 17 inches. So I'm going to cut 18 inches because I'm going to be sewing a net with it underneath, and then I'm going to be adding it to my half length as well. So I'll measure 17 inches now, and that's going to be the length of my flare. So after measuring that, I'll cut this out. Okay, so once I cut my flare out, everything is still going to be together. This is what I'm going to have. So now to cut this, I'm going to fold like this. So when I'm folding, you can first remove your 2 inches seam allowance. Okay, so once you mark out your 2 inches seam allowance, you are going to fold your front in such a way that it's not going to enter into the seam allowance. Then I'm going to separate the front. Okay, so this is going to be my front, and then for the back, I'll simply fold it into two and then cut into. So remember, our back piece is in two, so this is going to be the front, and we'll have these two for the back. So the back is the one that carries the zipper allowance. Okay, so by the time you remove your zipper allowance, you will have exactly the same thing. So I've cut out the flare. This is the front. Okay, just like I separated, this is my front, and these two is going to be for the back. Okay, so this is the center part where I have my zipper allowance, and then this is going to be the back. You can see that I have exactly the same thing. So what I'm going to do now is to bring in my front, and then I'm going to sew the front to the front. Okay, so I have sewn the flare on the lower part. I have sewn the flare to the upper part. So this is the front and this is the back. So for the back, I joined the zipper allowance and I installed my zipper, as you have seen. So after that, I placed the front against the back, and then I sew it on the shoulder as well as the side seam. So this is what I have. So now what I'm going to do next is to sew my net to the lower part to make up the full length that I need. Remember, I stopped it around 34 inches, and I want the full length to be around 44. So I will need a net of about 10 inches. Okay, I cut it in a straight form. You can also cut it in form of a flare if you have enough, but I just cut mine in straight form, and it's 10 inches by the length that I need to go around my flare. I'm not going to gather it, I'm just going to sew it to it like this, but you can also gather it if you want. So I'll go. So I'm going to quickly illustrate the sleeve as well. So assuming this is my sleeve, the length that I'm working with for the sleeve is 6 inches, and then the width is going to be your armhole measurement. So this is like a miniature. So after drafting your sleeve like this, the next thing I'm going to do is to bring in my main bodice. Okay, and then I'm going to bring it together. You can either measure it or you just use your sleeve. So you measure the part that your net covers. So that's about 6 inches. So here I'm going to come here and then measure the 6 inches. So I'm going to assume this to be my 6 inches. So once your 6 inches stops here, I'm going to mark it on both points, and then I'm going to open it out. So after opening it out like this, I'll bring in my ruler, and then I'm going to connect the 2 points together. So after connecting these 2 points together, this part I'm going to be cutting it with net, and I'll cut this part with my ankara fabric. So now I'm going to separate it. So after separating it, I'll go over and cut this with net and add my seam allowance. I'll cut this part with ankara as well and add my seam allowance. So I have cut this already. I thought my camera was recording. So this is the part with the ankara, and this is the other part that I cut with my net. So matching it together, you can see this is the lower part and this is the upper part that I cut with the net. So for the gathers on top of the net, if you are working with a flare, you can just measure what you have here and then use it to cut out a flare. But I'm just going to be gathering it, so I just measured my armhole line and I multiply it by 2. So whatever I have, I just used my I used my I used my net to cut out that measurement. Okay, so what I measured was this multiplied by 2, and then I cut out a net of that length. So what I'm going to do now is to gather this net on top of this before fixing this. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. If you want it to be in form of a flare, you just need to measure this upper part and then divide it by 6.28 if you are working with a full flare, or 3.14 if you are working with a half circle flare, and then you make sure that your length is longer than what you have here. But for me, I don't want to use too much net fabric, so I'm not cutting it in form of a flare, I'm cutting it in form of a straight fabric so that I can gather it. So now I just measured what I have here and I multiplied it by 2. So I used that to cut a long fabric, and the length of the fabric I made sure it is more than what I have on this ankara. You can see that it is in excess. So now I'm just going to go ahead and gather this. Okay, I'm going to gather it on this part, then after gathering it, I'm going to sew the cap of the sleeve to it. So after sewing this, I'm going to go ahead and fix it round my armhole. I hope you understand that. Okay, so I've gone ahead to sew my sleeve. You can see the sleeve now. So you make sure that the place that you cut out matches where you're going to sew it. So this is the sleeve, this is the first sleeve, and this is the second sleeve. You can see the cap area of the sleeve, and this is the part with the ankara and the gathers on top of it. So on the hem as well, I sew the fabric to the hem. Like I said, I'm not going to gather it, I just sew it straight like this. So this is what I have. This is the front and this is the back. So for the back, you can see the V shape that we created for the back. So now I'm going to bring in my ribbon. I have this 1-inch velvet bias, and then I'm just going to use it to tape it on this edge. So I'm going to start from the center back. I'm going to place it on it like this. Okay, I'll just fold it inward and then place it like this and then sew. Okay, so I'm going to sew it all the way like this. When I get here, I'm going to take it to the arm as well. Then I'll take it to the front as well, and then I'm going to take it here and then take it back to the back, to the center back where it started from. And also on the waistline, I'm going to do the same thing. From the center back, I'm going to tape the waistline also with bias through to the front and back to the center back. So I'll go ahead and do this now. Okay, so I have taped it. You can see I just taped it around the neckline and the cold shoulder, the off shoulder part of the sleeve, and then I took it back to the center back, and I did the same thing on the waistline. So you can see the waistline too, I taped it with my velvet bias. So on the neckline, I just cut out a net fabric of about 4 inches, but and it's very long, so I folded it into two like this. Then after folding it into two, I pleated it. So I pleated it around the neckline, as you have seen. So you just fold it into two. By the time you fold it into two, you have about 2 inches, and then you continue to pleat like this, so you can see. So I just pleated it round the neckline. Then after pleating it round the neckline, I also placed my bias on it, and then I sew it round so that I can conceal this part where I sew it to the neckline. So this is what it looks like. Now I'm going to take it to the mannequin so that we can see how it looks like. So this is the full view of the dress. This is the neckline, the pleated part of the neckline, the yoke, and this is the sleeve. So this is what it looks like. So on the hem, I just cut my net in a straight form, so it's not so much. So if you want to cut in a straight form like this and you have enough fabric, you just need to gather it a little bit around the neck, the flare hem, so that it can give you something really full, or you just cut your net in form of a flare. So I just sew like a lining underneath it because the ankara part is too short and I don't want it to be exposing too much. So I just sew like an underskirt. You can leave it like this if you're comfortable with it, or you just sew whatever it is, or you wear on underwear underneath it. So this is it. It's really beautiful and it's very simple to make. I hope you enjoyed making this beautiful tutorial with me. If you enjoyed it, let us know in the comment section. Like, comment and subscribe to our channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.